Honourable Leanne Del-Seal.
Mr Speaker, I'm surprised that the Government National Party members from the Canterbury region haven't dominated their contribution to this debate. Well, I can't refer to some of these matters. I know that this is extremely helpful that my colleagues are trying to be in terms of my contribution to this debate, but the point is that this is an important issue in Canterbury, and I would have thought that every single national Canterbury member would have been speaking on this particular bill. I actually think it is very important that they get up and speak in the House, but we've seen Aucklander after Aucklander, and I think only one representative from the Canterbury region has actually spoken in the House, and I think that is a pity. Mr Speaker, I want to remind this House about the legislation that we are extending with this bill, because I believe that it's important to continually remind ourselves of what was an utterly undemocratic bill that was passed through an undemocratic process that saw a government predetermination become law through a sequence of events. And I want to just remind the House what those sequence of events relate to. One of them was the general election, obviously, in 2008, and the determination that the government had to make significant changes in the area of our resource management legislative framework. But there was a problem in Canterbury that they needed to address as a matter of urgency, because the problem in Canterbury related to the allocation of water rights. And that was a massive issue there because of the intensive dairying, or the intensification of dairying on the Canterbury Plains, parts of Canterbury that simply were never naturally resourced for dairying because of the amount of water that it requires. And so the government decided that it would do a review. But very interestingly, that review did not come from the council itself. So we faced a similar situation when we were in government, with the Rodney District Council approaching us as we became the government, asking us to continue the process of the review that they'd written to the previous government about, and in fact a unanimous decision of the council to have themselves replaced with commissioners, so that the terrible issues that were arising in that area were able to be. It was a unanimous decision from the Rodney District Council. So I've just noticed that government members like to toss that across the House from time to time. So I just want to remind the House that that was a unanimous decision of the Rodney District Council for the government to intervene. So what did the government do here? They appointed Wyatt Creech to undertake a review. Now, Wyatt Creech not only has an association with the government, a fairly obvious one, but also with the industry that demands so much of our water resources in Canterbury. So his selection to chair this review was utterly and completely inappropriate right from the outset. It was biased. And look, I've made the point before that for a conflict of interest to exist, it doesn't have to be a real conflict of interest. It's simply the perception. But this is real. This is a real conflict of interest when one is a dairy farmer on one hand and also a former member of the government tasked with a role. The government set the terms of reference. They were not consulted with ECAN, and in fact the whole process was sparked off by the so-called letter signed by all of the mayors in the region. And I know that my colleague's nodding her head. She remembers that, because we all know what really happened. We know that Jo Goodhue, in her role as the MP in Timaru, approached the Mayor of Timaru in order to get all of the mayors to sign up to this letter, which never went back to the individual councils councils for debate, was never signed off by any one of those councils for sending off to the minister, but the mayors signed this letter at the request of the government so that they would have the basis for this review, for this intervention to occur. And I worry about how we have lost sight of what really happened in those early days, because we all understood very clearly from the Minister, Nick Smith, that whatever, and I want to quote him into the record again as I know others have done, whatever the circumstances, the next regional council elections in Canterbury will take place no later than the election schedule for late 2013. And here we are in the inevitable position of seeing this government break yet another firm commitment to the people of Canterbury that they would stand alongside them in their hour of need. On this particular occasion, they promised the restoration of democracy. There was an acceptance that democracy was being set aside, and nobody on this side of the House accepted that for 1 minute. The government acknowledged that that's what they were doing, but they said it was for a very limited period of time. But no, it wasn't for a limited period of time. We are now facing a further 3 years without any democratic return. And what is extraordinary on this particular case is that not only was the original decision so fundamentally flawed, and I've got a copy of the Creech report here, and it is a report of two halves, absolutely a report of two halves. One part's been written as a political analysis to support the government's predetermined position, and the other part of it is written by an independent analyst who has described ECAN's improvements in the operation and the challenges that they faced with the water chapter, which of course were in a position to be implemented shortly after the commissioners took over. So all of that work was completely ignored by the government because they had a predetermined position. So then we fast track to today, and we've got a regulatory impact statement which makes it absolutely clear that there has not been a Crown-led public consultation process with Canterbury stakeholders and communities on the options in the regulatory impact statement. This limits our ability, and this is a quote, this limits our ability to present community views on the options in this analysis. Well, I have to say that when the two options, the two preferred options, are those that are preferred by the by ECAN commissioners themselves, which are that we have a mixed model of governance, and that and the two options, the one option is the legislation to establish a permanent mixed governing model, and the other was to have a transitional mixed governing body with the transfer back to a fully democratically elected council within a 3-year period beyond that, so the review of arrangements in 2017. So I think that if the government had actually adopted the advice of the regulatory impact statement and from the advisors in that regard, then we would have been able to perhaps see our way clear to supporting some change in this area, even if it had been a transitional provision as opposed to a permanent transition. So that to me is the fundamental flaw in this whole process. The government has started with a position, and as I said in the committee stages, it is really the expression improved water management that sticks in people's throats in Canterbury, because we know that this has got nothing to do with improved water management. This has got everything to do with access to the water, and unfortunately that isn't necessarily in the interests of Canterbury.
Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak in favour of this bill, and I appreciate that it is one that arouses great passion